So in 1886, there was this group of teenagers in East Africa, and they were ordered by their absolute monarch to denounce their newly adopted faith,
Right.
or, be burned alive.
Right. And they actually chose the fire, which is just, it's completely
It
staggering.
really is. But what makes their story truly astonishing isn't just the sheer terror of how they died, it's that their execution inadvertently altered the geopolitical map of the world.
Oh, absolutely. It ultimately ended up handing their entire kingdom over to the British Empire.
Yeah, which is just wild. So today we are doing a deep dive into this, looking at a massive stack of incredibly diverse sources to piece this narrative together.
We've got historical wikis, detailed Catholic and Anglican archival accounts, modern African pilgrimage guides, and even some contemporary political commentary.
Right, like the pieces from publications like the Southern Cross.
Hmm.
Our mission here is to help you understand how this group of young royal pages defied an absolute monarch, how their staggering sacrifice resonated across continents, and why their legacy is still the subject of fierce political and religious debate today. So, okay, let's unpack this.
To really grasp the magnitude of what happened between 1885 and 1887, we have to start by looking at the incredibly volatile environment these young men were navigating.
Right, the setting is crucial here.
Totally. This was the Kingdom of Uganda, which is located in modern-day Uganda, and it was right on the precipice of the scramble for Africa.
Oh man, that period where European powers were just aggressively drawing lines on maps, right?
Exactly. Attempting to claim vast territories they had often, never even seen. And in the middle of this escalating tension in 1884, a teenager named Mwanga II inherits the Buganda throne.
A teenager.
Yeah, he becomes the Kabaka the king.
And he isn't just taking over some, quiet, isolated nation. Buganda was a highly sophisticated, organized kingdom.
It really was.
But Mwanga's timing couldn't have been worse. It's like a teenager being handed the keys to a house, right? As three different rival empires are trying to move their stuff into the living room.
That is a perfect way to describe it. He's inheriting a kingdom experiencing a massive three-way cultural collision.
So who exactly is moving into the living room here?
Well, you have Arab Muslim traders who had been pushing inland from the coast for decades, establishing, deeply lucrative trade routes and religious influence.
Okay, so that's one.
Then you had the French Catholic missionaries, specifically the Society of Missionaries of Africa. People colloquially called them the White Fathers because of the distinct white monastic habits they wore.
Right. And then the British, obviously.
Yep, the British Anglican missionaries. All three factions are in Mwanga's court, just aggressively vying for the ear of the king, trying to secure dominance.
And Mwanga is just watching this, feeling the walls close in. I mean, the historical sources note he was already intensely paranoid about the German annexation of nearby territories.
He was terrified of losing his grip.
Yeah, he's a teenager trying to hold on to absolute power. But the real structural collapse wasn't coming from those uninvited foreign guests, was it?
No, it wasn't. The real threat was a fundamental shift happening inside his own palace walls, among his own servants.
Among the royal pages.
Exactly. In the Buganda kingdom, pages were young men, often drawn from prominent local families or captured from rival tribes, and they served the king directly.
They were essentially the rising political class, right? The future chiefs.
Right. And traditionally, their existence was defined by complete, unquestioning submission to the Kabaka. But because of the influx of these missionaries, a new class of educated, fiercely religious royal pages was emerging.
Which changes everything.
It does. For the first time in the history of the Buganda kingdom, the king's own subjects were claiming loyalty to a higher authority.
They were actively putting a monotheistic god above the Kabaka. Which, in a political system where the king's word literally dictates whether you breathe your next breath is a massive problem.
It's an existential threat to the state. These young men had developed a moral framework that superseded the king's absolute power. They were deciding for themselves what was right and wrong.
And a dictator can't have that.
Exactly. For a monarch whose entire authority rests on total submission, psychological and physical found. A servant who suddenly has independent moral boundaries is, well, no longer a servant. In Mwanga's eyes, that level of independent thought is outright treason.
And that paranoia over losing absolute control is what directly drives the fatal clash. But when you get into the specific accounts, it wasn't just about abstract political loyalty, was it? It was intensely personal.
Very personal. The king demanded total submission in every aspect of life, and that actually included preying on his pages for sexual favors.
Right. And the Christian converts, both the Catholics and the Anglicans, began to categorically refuse these
Yeah,
advances.
they did. And the tension finally broke in late 1885 with a man named Joseph Mukasa Balikudembe.
The proto-martyr.
Yes, the first of the group to die. Mukasa was a highly trusted senior servant. I mean, he had even saved the king's life from a venomous snake at one point.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, he was also a lay catechist. This meant he was an everyday, unordained guy who had taken on the massive responsibility of secretly teaching the Christian faith to the younger pages.
Reading, writing, all of that.
Right. But Mukasa crossed a fatal line when he openly reproached the king for ordering the assassination of a British Anglican bishop, James Hanton.
So he essentially looked an absolute monarch in the eye and told him he had committed an evil act.
Yes, and the king's response is swift. He has Mukasa beheaded in November of 1885.
Which creates a massive leadership vacuum among the Christians at court.
Right, and that vacuum is filled by a young man named Charles Lwanga.
And Lwanga steps up knowing exactly how dangerous the situation is. He begins secretly baptizing the pages at night, right?
He does. He continues their education, and he actively maneuvers to protect these boys, some of whom are, like, barely teenagers, from the king's sexual predation.
He would send them away on fabricated errands just to keep them out of Mwanga sight. But wait, I have a question about this. If we look closely at Mwanga's motivations across all these different historical accounts, was this actually about religion at all? Or was this really just a tyrant throwing a lethal tantrum because his ego was bruised and he couldn't get what he wanted sexually from his subjects?
What's fascinating here is how the historical sources synthesize those two seemingly distinct motivations.
Okay, how so?
If you read regional historians like Asa Okoff, they heavily emphasize the geopolitical angle. They point out that Mwanga was genuinely trying to protect the integrity of his kingdom. He perceived that foreign religious influences were actively poisoning his society.
Right, like an invasive force.
Exactly. And he knew that if he didn't act decisively, he would look weak to his older traditional chiefs who were already demanding a purge.
But then you cross-reference that with the contemporary analysis from publications like the Southern Cross, and a much darker, much more intimate reality emerges alongside the politics.
Right. They argue that Mwanga used extreme violence to assert dominance, precisely because his pansexual demands were rejected.
He was enraged that his absolute power was being checked by the personal boundaries of his subjects.
Yes. In his worldview, politics and absolute physical ownership of his people were indistinguishable. It wasn't merely that they prayed to a European god, it was that their new faith gave them the unprecedented audacity to deny the king's physical demands.
And by May of 1886, that rage just boils over completely.
It does. The king calls a massive court assembly. He draws a line in the sand and formally demands to know who will continue to pray.
And knowing his absolute lethal power, human instinct says you lie or you run and hide in the jungle.
But they don't do that.
No. Instead, led by Charles Lwanga, these young men step forward in front of the entire court and declare their fidelity to their religion.
It's unbelievable bravery. The king immediately condemns them to death, kicking off a brutal days-long death march to Namugongo, which was the kingdom's traditional execution site.
And the physical and psychological toll of that march was specifically designed to break them, right?
Absolutely. They were bound, beaten, and forced to walk for days. The guards gave them every opportunity to let the terror set in and just renounce their beliefs. But they didn't.
And then comes June 3, 1886.
Right, the massive execution at Namugongo. 22 Catholics and 23 Anglicans were killed. The vast majority of them were wrapped in reed mats and burned alive together on a massive pyre.
You look at the historical records of that day, and the individual stories are just staggering. A lot of these victims were incredibly young.
Like Kizito.
Yes, Kizito was the youngest. He was only 14 years old. And according to the Catholic accounts, this kid wanted to be baptized so badly in the months prior that he used to drive the missionaries crazy.
Oh yeah, at one point, a frustrated priest actually threw him out of a ground floor window just to get rid of him because he wouldn't stop begging for the sacrament.
That's insane. And yet, when the persecution reached its peak, Charles Lwanga secretly baptized him in the confines of a prison cell.
The psychological weight of a 14-year-old facing a blazing fire is hard to even fathom. But the accounts note that on the day of the execution, Mwanga told him, "I will take your hand. We will die together."
And Kizito walked to the pyre, holding Charles Lwanga's hand, reportedly laughing with joy. He had completely lost his fear of death.
It's incredibly moving. And then you have Matthias Mulumba, who presents a totally different profile.
Right. She wasn't a teenager.
No, he was a 50-year-old senior chief.
Yeah.
He had voluntarily given up a life of immense privilege, wealth, and multiple wives to adopt this new faith.
And what he did on that march.
During that grueling death march to Namugongo, Mulumba simply sat down in the middle of the dirt road. He refused to walk another step toward the ceremonial execution site and demanded that the guards kill him right there on the spot.
And they ended up hacking him to pieces. It is incredibly brutal, but it just shows the complete refusal to participate in the king's theater of power.
And the psychological warfare of these executions extended to the families, too, like with Abaga Tazinde.
Oh, the story is heartbreaking.
He was a 17-year-old royal page, but his adoptive father was Mukajunga, the chief executioner of the Buganda kingdom, and the king ordered Mukajunga to orchestrate the death of his own son.
The sources describe his father spending an entire week pleading with him. I mean, Mukajunga is crying, begging his son to just say the words to renounce his faith, promising to hide him away where the king would never find him.
But Mukajunga refuses. He tells his father he loves him, but he cannot deny his God.
And his father, in this deeply twisted, heartbreaking act of mercy, orders his men to club Mbaga to death before throwing his body into the flames.
Purely so, his son wouldn't have to consciously feel the fire. It is a devastating picture of a society and a family torn apart by absolute conviction. To them, the king's power was temporary. Their new reality, their new moral framework was eternal.
They firmly believed they weren't just dying, they were stepping into an ultimate victory, which perfectly explains James Buzabaliago.
The musician.
Yeah, he was a musician in the court band. When the king is furiously sentencing him to death, James isn't cowering. He's literally making jokes. It's like looking a firing squad in the face and deciding to do a stand-up comedy routine.
He basically tells the Kabaka, "Goodbye then, I'm off to paradise to intercede for you."
The historical weight of that moment is incredible. It's a staggering level of defiance against a man who believed he owned the world.
And Mwanga truly believed that by lighting that massive fire at Namugongo, he would turn these rebellious Christians to ash and solve his political problem once and for all.
But he severely miscalculated the nature of martyrdom.
He really did. When the European missionaries eventually returned to Buganda, they expected to find the Christian faith completely eradicated.
Because they've been forced out during the height of the persecution.
Right, but instead they discovered an underground church. The faith had exploded to over 1,000 active followers. It had been meticulously kept alive by laymen hiding out in the jungles, secretly continuing to teach and baptize new converts in the dead of night.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Because the impact of that fire at Namugongo didn't stop at the jungle's edge. It crossed the ocean.
It did. King Mwanga didn't realize he was actually lighting a beacon that London could see.
Back in Victorian England, the British Church Missionary Society receives word of the executions. And they take the harrowing stories of these young martyrs and turn them into a massive, highly effective public relations campaign.
The mechanics of that campaign were remarkably modern. The Missionary Society printed detailed pamphlets recounting the bravery of young Kizito and Charles Lwanga, distributing them across churches and public halls in Britain.
You have to imagine the Victorian public reading these accounts. The moral outrage and the profound admiration for these African martyrs created a huge groundswell of public sentiment.
And at the time, the British Prime Minister, William Gladstone, was highly hesitant to formally annex Uganda. The empire was overextended, and it was an expensive logistical nightmare.
But the public pressure generated by the stories of the Uganda martyrs forces his hand. The British public demands that these Christian communities be protected.
Right. And in 1894, the British government officially declares Uganda a British protectorate.
It's an unbelievable historical paradox. By choosing to die for their faith, these young martyrs inadvertently provided the exact moral leverage the British Empire needed to completely take over their kingdom.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it perfectly encapsulates the famous quote from the early Christian writer Tertullian. "The blood of martyrs is the seed of the church." King Mwanga's desperate, brutal attempt to destroy the faith was the exact catalyst that guaranteed its permanent establishment in East Africa.
And what happened to Mwanga himself?
He eventually loses his throne, launches a failed rebellion against the very British forces he inadvertently invited in, and is exiled to the Seychelles. And in the ultimate historical irony, he actually converts to Anglicanism in exile, takes the name Danieri, and dies at just 35 years old.
Wow. So what does this all mean for us today? Because if you look at the sources we gathered, this isn't just dusty 19th century history confined to textbooks.
Not at all. The legacy of the Uganda martyrs is a massive living phenomenon that actively shapes millions of lives right now.
Right, in 1964, Pope Paul VI officially canonized the 22 Catholic martyrs. And today, the Namugongo shrine, which was built precisely over the site of the burnings, draws unbelievable crowds.
The scale of the modern devotion is staggering. Every single year on June 3rd, millions of pilgrims travel to the shrine. Many of them walk on foot for days or even weeks from neighboring countries across Africa to honor that sacrifice.
And that devotion remains unshakable, even in the face of modern threats.
Very true. Just recently, during the Martyrs' Day celebrations in June 2025, a rebel suicide bomber attacked the perimeter of the shrine.
But the pilgrims continue to pray. It's a stark reminder that the intersection of faith and violence in this region is not entirely a thing of the past.
But beyond the physical threats, it's fascinating to see how differently this single historical event is interpreted and utilized today, depending on which source you read.
Yeah, for instance, that article from the Southern Cross points out a really jarring divide right at the execution site.
Right, there is a magnificent Catholic basilica built there, but it largely ignores the 23 Anglican martyrs who died right alongside the Catholics, burned in the exact same fire.
It's a deep divide between different Christian denominations, highlighting how shared history can be remembered in segregated ways. But an even more intense debate is happening in the secular realm.
The history of King Mwanga and the martyrs is actively being used as a rhetorical weapon in contemporary Ugandan politics.
Right, and the contrast in our sources is stark.
Yeah.
Now, we must mention, we are simply reporting what is in our sources. We aren't taking a side. We're just showing you how deeply a 140-year-old event is tied to today's headlines.
Exactly. So on one hand, writers like Dr. Raymond Perrier in the Southern Cross argue that King Mwanga's true historical sin was the violent domination and exploitation of those without power.
Dr. Perry argues that modern political leaders are repeating this exact sin today by targeting minority groups.
But if you look at the rhetoric from local politicians, pushing the severe 2023 anti-gay laws that incredibly include the death penalty, they use the exact same history to claim something entirely different.
They invoke King Mwanga's story to argue that homosexuality is a foreign import, framing the king's actions not as predatory tyranny, but as an early defense of traditional African values against European cultural imperialism.
This raises an important question about the nature of historical memory itself. How do modern power structures selectively curate historical martyrdoms to either include or exclude people today?
Right, depending entirely on who is telling the story in the 21st century, King Mwanga is cast either as a symbol of predatory abuse or as a vanguard of anti-colonial resistance.
And the martyrs themselves are either revered as universal symbols of pure, unyielding faith, or they are utilized as political tools to define exactly who belongs in the modern nation of Uganda and who does not.
It is a heavy, incredibly complex legacy for a group of teenagers from the 1880s to carry. Once you give your life for a belief, your story no longer belongs to you. It belongs to history, and history will constantly reinterpret it to fit the needs of the present.
Because the past is never really past. The mechanisms of power, defiance, and conviction are always speaking directly to the present moment.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want you to think back to that opening image. Imagine standing before absolute power, knowing that one word of defiance will cost you your life in the most agonizing way imaginable. Reflect on the nature of your own convictions.
What core belief do you hold that is so fundamental to who you are that you would hold on to it even if the fire was right in front of you?
Understanding the deep, complex history of the Uganda martyrs isn't just about memorizing names and dates from the 1880s. It is the ultimate shortcut to being well-informed about the often contradictory, fiercely contested modern world we live in today. I want to leave you with a counterfactual to ponder on your own today. What if King Mwanga had simply ignored the Christian pages?
Yeah, what if he hadn't forced them into that massive, spectacular public execution at Namugongo?
Would Christianity have ever taken such a massive, unshakable hold in East Africa? Did a tyrant's brutal, desperate attempt to crush a movement actually guarantee its ultimate world-altering victory? Think about that next time you see a political leader trying to stamp out an idea. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.